You see, one of the most dangerous things a man can overlook in the early stages of a relationship, or even years into it, is the power of words. I'm not talking about poetry or compliments. I'm talking about those subtle, sharp little phrases that cut not with volume, but with intent. When a woman says something like, "You're too sensitive," or "You always overreact," you might brush it off the first few times. You might even start to believe it. But here's the thing. What sounds like casual criticism is often the beginning of psychological erosion. It's not about the sentence itself, but what it communicates underneath. The phrase, "You're too sensitive," doesn't just invalidate your feelings. It tells you that your emotional reality is inconvenient. It rewrites the script and makes her behavior irrelevant, while your reaction becomes the problem. That is manipulation at its most socially accepted level. Let me be clear, sensitivity is not weakness. Sensitivity is awareness, emotional intelligence. When someone mocks that awareness, they are trying to train you out of your instincts. Think about that. The more you hear it, the more you suppress how you feel. You stop speaking up. You hesitate to confront issues, not because they went away, but because you've been programmed to believe that expressing them will make you look needy or insecure. And that's when the slow death of your self-respect begins. The real danger is how normalized this has become. Society often praises women for being strong when they are sarcastic or biting, but shames men for calling it out. You're told to man up, to not take it personally, but you should take it personally, because it is personal. When someone repeatedly speaks to you in ways that minimize your emotions, challenge your identity, or question your masculinity, that is not teasing. It's not banter. It's contempt, dressed in charm. Here's the philosophical core of it. Language shapes reality. Words are the architecture of our relationships. When those words are laced with mockery, dismissal, or condescension, they slowly deform your sense of self. You stop seeing yourself through your own eyes and start seeing yourself through the distorted lens she hands you. And once you're inside that frame, it's incredibly difficult to get out. Now, I'm not saying walk away from every disagreement or every awkward conversation. We're human. Misunderstandings happen. But if there's a pattern, if her go-to language in conflict is to insult, belittle, or gaslight, you're not in a partnership. You're in a power struggle. And in a power struggle, someone always has to shrink for the other to feel tall. This isn't just about her words. It's about your boundaries. Because a man with no emotional boundaries is like a house with no walls. Anyone can walk in, graffiti the inside, and walk out without consequence. You need to be able to say, "No, that's not acceptable." Not with rage, not with drama, but with calm certainty. The kind that doesn't seek permission to be respected. Respect is not requested, it is required. And if she can't offer that, especially in how she speaks to you when she's frustrated or joking, then I'll say this as plainly as I can. Leave. Don't argue. Don't defend. Don't wait for change. Just leave. Because the longer you stay, the more fluent you become in a language that teaches you how to doubt yourself. And the moment you begin to doubt your worth, that's the moment you lose it. Don't let words that sound small become the reason you forget how big you are. Another phrase that should make you stop in your tracks. If you really loved me, you'd... Now pause and think about that. Because what she's doing in that moment isn't asking for love. She's holding it hostage. This is not a request for affection or effort. It's a calculated test, a manipulation technique that twists your love into a bargaining chip. And many men fall for it, thinking they're proving loyalty when in reality they're being quietly coerced into emotional servitude. Let's break this down. At its core, love is meant to be given freely, not demanded under pressure. The moment affection becomes conditional, it stops being love and becomes control. That sentence, "if you loved me," is rarely about love itself. It's about getting something, more attention, more sacrifice, more submission. It's a tool of emotional leverage, and it works by tapping into your fear of loss. You want to be the good guy. You want to be seen as devoted, not distant. So when she questions your love, your instinct is to prove it. But ask yourself, why does love need to be proven through compliance? That's not partnership. That's performance. And once you start performing for approval, you're no longer in a relationship. You're in an emotional audition you never agreed to. This is what psychologists call emotional blackmail. It's subtle, and that's why it's so dangerous. It starts with sentences like, "If you really cared, you wouldn't be talking to other women, even if the conversation was innocent. Or if I meant anything to you, you'd cancel your plans, even when those plans were important to you." Notice the framing. It's never a discussion about needs, boundaries, or compromise. It's an accusation, a guilt trip, a trap. And here's the irony. The more you give in to this emotional manipulation, the less respect she has for you. Because deep down, people don't admire those who bend over backwards at every test. They admire those who know where to draw the line. And in trying to win her love, you may actually be losing her respect, and worse, losing yourself. Let's take this deeper for a moment. In philosophy, we talk about the concept of autonomy, the ability to act according to your own reason, not external pressure. A healthy relationship should protect your autonomy, not erode it. But when someone uses emotional pressure to extract behavior, what they're really saying is, my needs matter more than your values. And if you surrender to that dynamic long enough, you'll forget what your values even were. Real love never asks you to betray yourself. It doesn't need to. When love is authentic, it invites effort. It doesn't demand obedience. And a woman who truly respects you will never use affection as a carrot on a stick. She'll communicate her needs clearly without testing your loyalty through emotional traps. This is the mistake many men make. They think love requires sacrifice. And to an extent, it does. But not self-sacrifice. Not the kind that chips away at your dignity and boundaries every time you're pressured into doing something you don't feel aligned with. That's not love. It's dependency masked as connection. So the next time you hear, "if you really loved me, you'd," understand that what follows is not a measure of your love. It's a reflection of her need for control. And you are not here to be controlled. You are here to love and be loved freely, consciously, and with respect. Never let your love become the leash someone uses to lead you away from your own truth. There's another form of language that often flies under the radar, more slippery, more socially acceptable, but just as corrosive. I'm talking about passive aggression. That subtle art of saying something without saying it, of smiling while twisting the knife. It shows up in phrases like, "Sure, do whatever you want," or, "Wow, must be nice to have that kind of free time." At first glance, they don't seem threatening. They might even sound playful. But underneath, they carry resentment, contempt, and often a deep unwillingness to communicate like an adult. The problem with passive aggression is that it creates emotional landmines. You never know what's real. You ask a simple question, and you're met with sarcasm or cold dismissal. You try to have a conversation, and instead of clarity, you get cryptic responses or stony silence. That's not conflict resolution, it's emotional warfare. Now let's get something straight. Conflict is not the problem. Conflict is healthy. Two people with different backgrounds, different temperaments, different emotional wiring, they're going to clash. That's normal. What's not normal is turning disagreement into psychological punishment. When someone refuses to speak openly about how they feel, and instead chooses to withhold affection, use sarcasm, or guilt trip you into compliance, that's not a communication style. That's avoidance dressed as maturity. Here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. Passive aggression is a defense mechanism. It's what people use when they're too afraid to be vulnerable, but still want to exert power. Instead of saying, "I felt hurt by what you did," they say, "It's fine," with that tone. You know the one. And because you're trying to avoid escalation, you end up playing along, interpreting, guessing, walking on eggshells. Slowly, you become responsible not just for your behavior, but for decoding every mood swing and hidden message. That is emotional labor you did not sign up for. What makes this dynamic even more toxic is the confusion it creates. Because when someone is openly cruel, at least you can name it. You can respond. But when someone cloaks their frustration in sarcasm or silence, you're left doubting your instincts. You start asking yourself, did I imagine that? Am I being too sensitive? And just like that, the gaslighting begins. Not necessarily in the malicious, calculated way, but in the insidious, everyday way that slowly chips away at your sense of emotional safety. And let me be blunt. Safety is not negotiable in a relationship. If you don't feel emotionally safe, if you can't speak, disagree, or show vulnerability without being punished indirectly, then you're not in a partnership. You're in a silent tug of war where no one ever wins, but you keep losing little pieces of yourself trying to keep the peace. You need to understand the philosophical truth here. Clarity is kindness. In a mature relationship, disagreements are aired out, not weaponized. Emotions are expressed, not suppressed. And language is used to build connection, not sow confusion. A woman who cannot speak her truth clearly will force you to become the translator of her pain, and that is a burden that will exhaust your mind and your masculinity. Now, I'm not saying she needs to be perfect with her words. None of us are. But if the pattern is persistent, if every conversation feels like a test, every argument ends with silence, and every emotion she has turns into a performance of passive disdain, you are being emotionally worn down, not by what she says, but by what she refuses to say directly. And that's the paradox. Passive aggression feels small, but it does massive damage over time. Like a slow leak in a foundation, it may not look dramatic, but it can collapse the whole structure if left unchecked. Never tolerate a connection where honesty is punished and silence is rewarded. Speak directly or walk away decisively. There's a moment in every man's life where he has to ask himself one question. Do I want to be respected or do I want to be tolerated? And that question often becomes crystal clear when a woman says something like, "I don't need a man," or "Men are all the same." Now, don't get distracted by the surface. These are not just offhanded remarks. They're declarations about her worldview, about how she sees you, and more importantly, how she sees masculinity as a whole. Let's call it what it is: ideological contempt. When a woman makes generalized, dismissive statements about men, especially directed at you, directly or indirectly, she is showing you that your identity is not valued, that your presence is optional, replaceable, maybe even burdensome. And here's the most dangerous part. If you stay long enough, you might start to believe it. Let's take a psychological lens to this. In any relationship, there are two energies, masculine and feminine. It's not about gender roles or outdated stereotypes. It's about polarity, that push and pull that creates attraction, chemistry, and flow. When a woman holds deep-seated resentment or disdain for masculine energy, she will constantly try to dominate or neutralize it. She will shame you for leading, criticize you for not leading correctly, and resist the very stability she secretly craves. You'll never win because the game is rigged against what you naturally are. And let's be honest, this isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's subtle. It shows up when she rolls her eyes every time you talk about your goals, when she downplays your efforts, mocks your opinions, or makes jokes at your expense in front of others. It shows up when she sees your confidence as arrogance, your vulnerability as weakness, and your ambition as a threat. This isn't healthy tension. It's fundamental incompatibility masked as personality. Philosophically, this comes down to one truth. You cannot build something meaningful with someone who does not respect the raw material you are made of. That respect must exist at the most basic level, before the romance, before the conflict, before the conversation even begins. Without it, everything becomes negotiation. And the moment respect becomes negotiable, you've already lost. Many men ignore this kind of disrespect because it's not overt. She doesn't scream. She doesn't insult. She just constantly communicates through tone and timing that your value is conditional. And the tragedy is, most men try harder. They believe that if they can just prove themselves, she'll soften. She'll see their worth. But let me say this with clarity. You never have to prove your worth to someone who genuinely sees it. When a woman truly respects you, it shows in the way she listens, the way she speaks to you even when she's upset, the way she honors your space, your time, your masculinity. And that kind of respect doesn't come from fear or obligation. It comes from alignment, a deep recognition that she values what you are, not what she can turn you into. And if she doesn't, if she speaks of men with contempt, if she frames your presence in her life as a convenience instead of a connection, then you are not in a relationship. You are in a slow erosion of self. And that kind of erosion doesn't just damage your confidence. It rewires how you see women, relationships, and yourself. That's a cost too high to pay for anyone. If a woman shows you she doesn't respect men, believe her. And leave before you forget how to respect yourself.